Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the case of Alfred Gaynor,
Oh, okay.
a serial killer who operated in Springfield, Massachusetts in the 90s.
Right.
You sent this one over. It's a Wikipedia article.
Yeah.
Really interesting case. And I think a good one for a deep dive. We get to kind of go beyond the basic facts that are there in the Wikipedia article and kind of see if we can pull out some patterns, some psychology maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Whenever we look at a case like this, we really want to try to understand, how does someone go down this road? What are the factors that contribute?
Right.
And, how can we maybe learn something from this case that could help prevent future tragedies?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating to kind of start at the beginning and see if
Right.
we can find any clues in the early life
Sure.
of the perpetrator.
Yeah.
So, the Wikipedia article says Gaynor was born in Springfield in 1966.
Okay.
Pretty normal childhood. Worked some blue-collar jobs. Nothing really jumps out at you right away.
That's really interesting because, when you think about the stereotype of a serial killer, you might picture, a troubled childhood or early signs of violence.
Right.
But here we have someone who seemingly had an ordinary upbringing.
Right. Yeah, so it really does make you wonder what that tipping point is.
Exactly. Yeah. Like what happens in someone's life that takes them from an average person
Right?
to someone capable of such horrific acts.
Yeah. And the article does mention that Gaynor's descent kind of begins in the late 80s when he starts struggling with drug and alcohol addiction.
Hmm.
Do you see that a lot in these cases?
Oh, absolutely. Addiction is unfortunately a very common factor in
Yeah.
criminal behavior, especially when we're talking about violent crimes.
Right.
It's not an excuse, of course,
Right.
but addiction can create this really dangerous mix of desperation, impulsivity, impaired judgment, and that can be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like someone who's in the throes of addiction, they might be willing to do things that they would never even consider if they were sober.
They're not thinking clearly, their inhibitions are lowered,
Right.
and they may be driven by a desperate need to feed their addiction.
And then when you add in any pre-existing, maybe psychological vulnerabilities or
Right.
personality traits,
You can really escalate things.
yeah, it can really create a perfect storm
Absolutely.
for violence. So let's talk about Gaynor's first murder.
Okay.
This was April of 1995. The victim was a woman named Vera Hallams. She was 45 years old,
Okay.
and Gaynor actually asked to spend the night at her apartment.
Oh, wow.
And then while she was sleeping, he attacked her, he tied her up,
Beat her.
beat her
Oh, my God.
so severely that she died from a brain injury.
Yeah.
And then after all that,
This is just awful.
I know, it's horrifying. He then raped her body
Oh, that is just...
before robbing the apartment and leaving.
That level of brutality is just chilling.
It really is, and it's even more disturbing because this was his first murder.
Right. You would think there might be some hesitation,
Right.
some remorse, maybe even some clumsiness in a first-time offender.
Yeah, like a learning curve almost, but
But there's none of that here.
no, it's just pure rage and depravity.
It really makes you question what was going on in his mind.
Yeah, and the fact that he violated her body even after death, I mean,
That's very significant.
that suggests something deeper.
Absolutely. It's a sign of a deep psychological disturbance.
Right.
It's almost like a ritualistic act, a way of asserting complete dominance and control.
Right. Yeah, it's not even about the robbery anymore.
It goes way beyond that.
It's about power and really dehumanizing the victim.
Exactly.
So sadly, this was just the beginning.
Oh, no.
The killings escalate over the next few years, and it's like he's becoming bolder and more confident, and the crime's even more brutal.
Is there like a pattern to the victims or the way he's choosing them?
Yeah, well, so far it seems like he's targeting women, and a lot of them are struggling with drug addiction.
Okay, so there's a vulnerability there that he's exploiting.
Right, and he's using that vulnerability to gain their trust, to get close to them.
That's a really common tactic among predators.
Yeah, and it's just heartbreaking because these women are already facing so many challenges, and then they become victims of this horrific violence.
It's a terrible cycle.
So in June of 97, he kills Jillian Ermelini.
Yeah.
He lured her with the promise of drugs,
Hmm.
and then he strangled her and robbed her.
Okay.
Then a few months later, October of 97, two more victims. Robin Atkins, who he used cocaine with before beating, raping, and strangling her.
Oh, God.
And then Joanne Thomas, who was sodomized and strangled.
Yeah.
And he actually left fingerprints and semen at the scene.
He's getting sloppy, or maybe he just doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, it's like he's not even trying to hide it at this point.
That lack of concern for being caught is definitely a red flag.
Right.
It often indicates a sense of invincibility, like he thinks he's smarter than the police and he'll never be caught.
Right. And tragically, sometimes those guys are right for a while.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true.
And it gets even worse. In November of 97, Gaynor murders his own girlfriend, Yvette Torres, during a drug and alcohol binge.
Wow. So even those closest to him weren't safe.
No, it's like anyone could become a victim if they crossed his path or if he perceived them as a threat.
It's terrifying to think that someone could be so callous and detached from their own emotions.
Yeah, like where's the empathy?
Exactly.
And then in February of 98, it's like a frenzy of violence. He kills 3 more women, all within weeks of each other.
3 more.
Yeah, Loretta Daniels was strangled in an alley. Rosemary Downs was found tied up, gagged, and left to suffocate. And then Joyce Dickerson P., who he was seen with, just before she disappeared.
So the frequency is increasing too.
Right. It's like he's losing control.
Or maybe he's feeling emboldened by the fact that he hasn't been caught yet.
Yeah, that's possible too. The more he gets away with it, the more confident he becomes.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
But it's this pattern of killings that finally starts to get the attention of the police.
They must have been under immense pressure to catch him.
Oh, absolutely. The community was terrified.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine living in Springfield at that time knowing that this predator was out there?
It must have been terrifying, especially for women.
Especially for women who fit the profile of his victims.
Right, so they started to see the connections between the murders.
Yeah, they were starting to put the pieces together, noticing the similarities in the victims in the modus operandi.
But they needed that one piece of evidence to link him definitively to the crimes.
And that evidence came in a form that was relatively new at the time: DNA.
Ah, DNA evidence. This is where things start to get really interesting.
It really is. This is a pivotal moment in the case and in forensic science as a whole.
You're right. In the 1990s, DNA testing was still a relatively new tool,
Yeah,
but it was quickly becoming a game changer.
absolutely. So the police had actually detained Gaynor earlier after Joyce Dickerson Pay disappeared.
Okay.
They even took a blood sample, but they had to let him go because they didn't have enough evidence to hold him.
Oh, wow. That must have been frustrating.
Can you imagine knowing that you have this dangerous person in custody,
Right.
but you have to let them walk free?
That must have been agonizing for the investigators.
Yeah. And it wasn't until they found Dickerson P's body and they ran the DNA tests
Right.
that they finally had what they needed. The tests linked him not only to her murder, but also to Rosemary Downs' murder.
So the DNA was the key.
It was the smoking gun. They finally arrested him in April of 98.
Wow. What a breakthrough moment for the case.
It really was. And it highlights how advancements in science
Right.
can be so crucial in the pursuit of justice.
And what's so powerful about DNA evidence is its objectivity.
Right.
It's not influenced by human bias or emotions like eyewitness testimony can be.
Right. It's purely scientific.
Exactly. It provides a concrete link between the perpetrator and the crime scene.
And in a case like this, where the crimes are so horrific and the stakes are so high,
Right.
having that irrefutable evidence is essential.
Absolutely. It brings a sense of certainty and helps to ensure that the right person is held accountable.
But even with DNA evidence, the legal process can be a long and winding road.
Oh, I'm sure. And in Gaynor's case, there was a dramatic twist that no one saw coming.
It was a twist that really shook things up and revealed the raw emotions that often run high in these types of cases.
I can't wait to hear about this. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, we'll have to save that for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready when you are. You're saying about a dramatic twist in the courtroom.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It was during one of the hearings.
Okay.
Eric Downs, the son of Rosemary Downs,
Mm-hmm.
one of Gaynor's victims, he actually attacked Gaynor
Oh, wow.
in the courtroom with a chair.
Oh, my goodness.
Can you imagine the rage and the grief?
I mean, talk about raw emotion.
Yeah, and, it makes you think about what justice really means.
Right.
In a situation like this.
Exactly. Like, can any legal outcome truly address the pain and suffering
Right.
that's been caused?
Yeah.
I mean, the justice system can hold perpetrators accountable, but it can't erase the trauma
No.
or bring back the victims.
Right, and it often leaves the families feeling,
Yeah,
I imagine, both vindicated but also unsatisfied.
absolutely. It's a complex and difficult process.
For sure. So anyway, despite that outburst in the courtroom, the evidence against Gaynor was overwhelming.
I bet.
The DNA, the fingerprints,
That pointing to him.
yeah, it was pretty much an open and shut case. And so in May of 2000, he was convicted of 4 of the murders.
Okay.
Downs, Dickerson, Pay, Daniels, and Thomas.
Wow.
And he was sentenced to 4 life terms without the possibility of parole.
So that's it, right? Case closed.
You would think so, right?
Yeah.
But this is where the case takes another crazy turn.
Another one.
In 2008,
Why?
Gaynor decides to offer a plea deal.
Wait a minute. He's already serving multiple life sentences.
Right.
What could he possibly have to gain from a plea deal at this point?
That's what I thought when I read this. It
Yeah.
just didn't make any sense. But so he confesses to 4 additional murders.
Okay.
Vera Helms, Jillian Ermelini, Robin Atkins, and his girlfriend Yvette Torres.
So all cases that we talked about earlier.
Exactly. But here's the real shocker. He also confesses to the 1996 murder of Amy Smith.
Hold on. Isn't that the case where his nephew, Paul Fickling, was convicted and is currently serving a life sentence?
Yep.
I mean, this is huge. Why would he do that?
I know, it's wild, right? And his reasoning was that he didn't want to upset his mother.
His mother?
Yeah.
But she passed away in 2006.
I know.
So he waited 2 years after her death to confess.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre.
That's a strange kind of logic.
I know, it's like this cold-blooded killer suddenly has a conscience.
But only after his mother is gone.
Exactly. It's really hard to wrap your head around.
It is. It really makes you question his motives.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So what happened to Paul Fickling after Gaynor's confession?
Well, in 2010, Fickling's conviction was overturned.
Oh, wow.
But then in a new trial, he was convicted of complicity in Amy Smith's murder and sentenced to 20 years in prison.
Wow, so he still ended up serving time?
Yeah, but he got credit for the 14 years he'd already served.
Okay, so it wasn't a complete victory for him.
No, but it was definitely a significant development in the case.
And you know, it highlights how a single confession can have a ripple effect.
Right. It can completely change the course of justice.
Yeah, but hang on a second. You said that Gaynor confessed to 4 additional murders.
I did.
And Fickling was only involved in 1 of those.
That's right.
What about the other 3?
Well, this is where things get even crazier. In October 2010, Gaynor admits to killing 3 more people.
3 more?
Bringing his total confirmed victim count to 9.
9 victims.
9.
That's just mind-boggling.
It's a staggering number.
It really is, and it just goes to show that even when a case seems closed, there can be more to uncover.
Yeah, you never really know the full story.
And it makes you wonder, were there even more victims that we don't know about?
It's a chilling thought.
It is.
Yeah.
So on top of everything else, Gaynor starts creating and selling paintings from prison.
What?
I know.
He's profiting off of his crimes.
Yeah, and it caused a lot of outrage.
Understandably so.
I mean, can you imagine being a family member of one of his victims
Right.
and seeing him profit from his crimes?
Sure. That's just adding insult to injury.
It really is. And it raises a lot of ethical questions about, you know, prisoners' rights and the sensitivity towards victims'
It's
families.
a very gray area.
It is.
There's no easy answer.
Right. So before we move on, can you remind us of all 9 of Gaynor's victims and their ages?
Of course. So Gaynor's victims were Vera E. Helms, 45, Amy Smith, 20, Jill Ann Ermelini, 34, Robin M. Atkins, 29, Joanne C. Thomas, 38, Yvette Torres, 33, Loretta Daniels, 38, Rosemary Downs, 42, and Joyce Dickerson Pay, 37.
It's a long list, and it's important to remember that these were real people
Right.
with families and friends and lives that were cut short.
They were not just statistics.
Exactly. So with all of that in mind, let's kind of dive into some of the bigger themes and implications that this case brings up.
Okay, that's
And
fine.
one of the things that really jumps out to me is the role of drug addiction in this case.
Oh, yeah.
Not just with Gaynor himself, but
Right.
so many of his victims as well.
Yeah, it's really a tragic theme that runs throughout this whole story.
It is, I mean, from your perspective, how significant was addiction in this tragedy?
I think it played a huge role. You know, like we said before, addiction doesn't discriminate.
Right.
And this case just really exemplifies that.
Yeah.
You know, Gaynor's own addiction very likely contributed to his, downward spiral, his criminal behavior.
Right.
And then on the other side of it, you have so many of his victims who were also struggling with addiction, which made them vulnerable,
Yeah.
made them easy targets.
And it makes you think about how we as a society are addressing this issue.
Right.
You know, are we doing enough to support people who are struggling with addiction? Are we providing adequate access to treatment and resources?
Yeah, these are tough questions, but they're ones we need to keep asking.
Absolutely, for sure. Another thing that I found really striking was the role of the justice system in this case.
Yeah,
On one hand, you see the incredible power of DNA evidence.
right.
It was really crucial in linking Gaynor to the crimes,
Mhm.
bringing him to justice. But then you also see the potential for, mistakes, like what happened with Paul Fickling's initial conviction.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex system.
It is, for sure.
It's not perfect, but it's what we have.
Right. But it's good to kind of think critically about those systems and how they work.
Absolutely.
And I also think it's important to acknowledge the impact on the families of the victims.
No, of course.
I mean, they've had to endure the unimaginable grief of losing a loved one,
Yeah.
but also the horrific circumstances of their deaths, and then the constant media attention.
It's just unimaginable.
It is. And in the case of Amy Smith's family, they had to deal with the shock of that delayed confession and the implications it had for Paul Fickling.
Yeah. I mean, talk about adding insult to injury.
Right. It's just a lot for anyone to process.
It really is. It's hard to even fathom the emotional toll that this must have taken on all of the families involved.
Yeah. So I think it's important for us to remember that, these were real people.
Absolutely.
With lives and stories.
They're not just names on a list.
Exactly. And their families are still dealing with the consequences of Gaynor's actions.
Right. And we need to respect that.
Absolutely.
And honor their memories.
So this deep dive has been really insightful.
Yeah, I've learned a lot.
Me too. And I think you've really helped us to go beyond the basic facts of the case.
Well, that's what we try to do here.
We've explored the complexities of addiction, the intricacies of the justice system, and the profound impact this had on the families.
It's been a heavy conversation.
It has.
But it's also been really important.
I agree. It's something that we need to be talking about.
Absolutely.
So I just want to thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And for sharing your expertise.
Anytime.
And to our listeners out there, thank you for sending. In this case, it was a fascinating one to explore.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
And, if you have any other cases that you think would be good for a deep dive, send them our way.
Yeah, we're always looking for new material.
We are. Keep those suggestions coming. And until next time, stay curious.
And stay safe.